Good afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us on this beautiful Thursday. Welcome to our leadership conversation. It's the second installment. If you're just only joining us this week, where have you been? Where have you been? You can't even explain it with the data cost. Where have you been? Welcome to it, ladies and gentlemen. This week, we're going to be celebrating 2020 Distinguished Alumni Recipients. We are here to acknowledge them. We are here to honor them and find out what was all the contributions where leaders learned and are still learning. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Nondobego Wakasibisi. I'm a storyteller and a creative media entrepreneur. I am here to simply facilitate this conversation. If you're wondering who it's brought by, it is, of course, a series brought to you by the Rhodes University Division for Communication and Advancements, simply fostering a productive, lifelong relationship with the alumni. That's you and me, guys. That's all of us and all of us here together. Now, at any other time, obviously, the university would be doing these conversations a bit differently. But of course, you will know that we are reimagining ourselves in the new normal. And this, of course, is our new normal. We are making sure that the human connection is still felt even on new, virtual, and at times socially distant times. So that's why we're connecting. Thank you so much for joining us in all corners of the globe. We absolutely appreciate this time. Now we are celebrating our 2020 Distinguished Alumni. And you're wondering what exactly happens there? Well, we're celebrating someone who's made amazing and significant contributions to society, to their field, and of course to the Rhodes University itself. Why do we say where leaders learn? Well, listen, I hope you're ready for this 1 hour because we are about to really get into the thick of this whole conversation. If you're at home or wondering how on earth can I also be part of the Distinguished Alumni, all you need to do is go onto the Rhodes website and simply open and nominate a friend. Yes, you and I at home as alumni can be nominated. This is possible, but of course you have to fit in the criteria that's also been listed on the RU website. So I am super excited today. I have got my ululation voice on lock. I am super excited for this conversation. We are zooting on over all the way to London to be speaking to an alumni who's made significant contributions in health and social care policy, Brian OShea. Now, Brian is the continuing healthcare advisor at the Spinal Injuries Association in the UK. There he led on the charity's health and social care policy with a specific focus on NHS continuing healthcare to improve access to critical health and social care funding for spinal cord injured individuals. And of course, Brian did go to Rhodes. Yes, just like you and I, he did absolutely go to Rhodes. So I'm going to bring them online right now. We're going to talk to, well, firstly, welcome Brian himself all the way to London, thousands of kilometers on the other side. Brian, sawubona, sawubona, sawubona. Hello and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thanks.
And of course, Brian is not alone. We've got Andrew Lathrop, who's going to be there to read the citation, to give us more in-depth knowledge about Brian's work. Hello, Andrew.
On Tobago, lovely to be here with you.
And of course, the VC was here last week. He's joining us this week. The man of the moment. Hello, VC. Good evening, and how are you this week?
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you very much, Ninja.
It's so absolutely beautiful to be joined by you, VC. As I touched on a bit briefly, the order of proceedings today will start with a citation and then a congratulatory speech by Dr. Mabizela, and then, of course, a conversation between the two gentlemen that are going to be talking about disability equality, a human rights issue, the role of universities, government, and society. But before we go straight into that, I want to go first straight to Andre and let him introduce and set the scene for us, because he was the guy that actually nominated Brian. Before you read the citation, tell us about the sneaky nomination that you included here, Andrew.
Well, thank you. And yeah, these things have to be done slightly, as you say, on a closed basis. But the wonderful aspect of this was the team nature of this award, as in terms of those that stepped up to support Brian. A lot of his colleagues and those that he works with in the industry were there and came through with fantastic endorsements, and we will hear a bit about those. But then a lot of old Rhodians that really were so delighted to support Brian in terms of what he means for us to his Rhodes peer group.
Nice, amazing. No pressure to everyone back at home who's still crossing fingers that a friend throws in a favor. But Andrew, let's go straight into the citation and find out a bit more about Brian.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be reading this today. Thank you. So one of the endorsements for Brian, we start with him, and he says, through his leadership in the Continuing Health Care Alliance, Brian became a trusted partner of some of the most senior NHS policy and decision makers, and so now influences change on a national scale. That was from Peter Hamilton, a trustee of the Spinal Injuries Association. Brian was born in Zimbabwe, and his journey at Rhodes spanned from 1987 to 1990, at which time he completed a Bachelor of Commerce and an honours degree in business administration. I think those who know him, he completed quite a lot more as well, but we won't go into that. Although he grew up in an Irish household in Zimbabwe, with his education set against the backdrop of a transforming society, Brian was entirely comfortable with the revolutionary aspects of student life at Rhodes University in the late 1980s. One of his friends recalls that, and his peers while at Rhodes University regarded him as someone who was sympathetic with the natural gift of intellect that made him a leader and mentor for many during the most tumultuous time in the history of our country. Whilst at Rhodes University, OShea was always active, and he joined the rowing club, where he eventually earned himself selection for the 1990 men's first crew for the InterVarsity boat race, which was the first year the university won the event. Soon after completing his studies, he worked for Unilever in South Africa. His first job gave him the opportunity to travel the length and breadth of the country, working in areas such as northern Johannesburg, rural KwaZulu-Natal, and the Cape Flats, gave OShea a unique view of the country as a whole at a time of emerging socio-political change. It also engendered in him a love for South Africa equal to that of his native country, Zimbabwe. In 1994, after moving to the United Kingdom, OShea broke his neck in a swimming accident, which left him paralyzed from the shoulders down with limited use of his arms. Changing his life and career trajectory completely, he became an advocate for disability equality. In 1995, soon after his accident, he joined the Spinal Injuries Association in the UK to champion the various initiatives of the association. According to the founder and president of the association, Baroness Masham of Ilton, OShea has used his considerable intellect and analytical skills to become an acknowledged expert in one of the most complex areas of healthcare policy, and has used this knowledge to advocate on behalf of some of the most vulnerable in society to ensure that they have appropriate packages of care. Through his dedication and hard work, OShea has helped to shape and refine the national framework that underpins certain aspects of healthcare policy, and his vast knowledge has made him an influential figure whose views are regularly sought at a national policy-making level. This is noted by Lady Masham. In 1997, OShea underwent reconstructive surgery and further rehabilitation. In the late 90s, while further exploring disability equality, he met Vic Finkelstein. Victor Beryl Finkelstein is known as a pioneer of the social model of disability. Born in Johannesburg, Vic was both spinal cord injured and an anti-apartheid activist. Vic's work resonated deeply with OShea, and as a result, he went on to complete a diploma in disability equalities studies in 2008. OShea founded Equitability Training Limited in 2006 as a sole director. His company delivers disability, equality, and independent living training courses to individuals with spinal cord injury, universities, colleges, and private sector companies, and also the National Health Service in the UK. For the last 10 years, he has been back at the Spinal Injuries Association in the UK as a continuing healthcare advisor. He is the lead on the charity's health and social care policy work, with a specific focus on NHS continuing healthcare to improve access to critical health and social care funding for spinal cord injured individuals. OShea remains a very active member of the Old Rhodian community in the UK. And he says, I firmly believe that my experience of the collegiate education at Rhodes University, combined with the experience of living, learning, and working in Zimbabwe and South Africa, at a time of crucial change, equipped me with the tools to achieve greater disability equality. That's it. Thank you.
Now, that's definitely how you get an award to be the 2020 Distinguished Award Alumni. It makes me and it gives me so much pride to be part of this conversation. And I know I'm not alone when I say halala, 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 because in our audience as well is Brian's mom. Hello, Brian's mom. I know you're watching this. Greg Mark, Roger Brooks, Professor Surtees, and of course, Jane Campbell. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. And I'm sure you can join me in saying halala, halala. And to continue with those ululations, we've got the VC on the other side, because VC, you have to get in on this action. Come on.
I must. Program Director, Assistant Tobego, family and friends of Mr. Brian OShea, Rhodes University alumni who have joined us virtually across the globe, Rhodes University leadership and staff, and of course, more important, our distinguished alumnus, Mr. Brian OShea. Our university recognizes, honors, and celebrates its alumni who have distinguished themselves in our society and beyond through the award of the Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Award. The aim of the award is to honor Rhodes University alumni who, through their individual actions, achievements, and selfless service to humankind, have enhanced the reputation of their alma mater. It acknowledges the recipient as an outstanding role model for current and future generations of Rhodes University students. The recipient of this award should personify the attributes and values that Rhodes University seeks to instill in its graduates. On behalf of our council, our chancellor, and the entire Rhodes University community, I wish to extend our heartfelt congratulations to you, Brian, on your well-deserved recognition by your alma mater with the Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Award. When that life-altering swimming accident left you paralyzed, you could have easily given up, wallowed in self-pity, and indulged in an emotionally draining self-blame exercise. In the true spirit of a graduate of an institution where leaders learn, you pulled yourself together and embraced your new reality with all the challenges it brought with it. And you did that with grace and turned those challenges into an opportunity to serve others. It really takes a special person with remarkable fortitude, considerable courage and foresight to see an opportunity in adversity and to turn that adversity into a personal cause. Yours is an inspiring personal triumph over adversity. Every year at graduation ceremonies, I remind our new graduates that they are joining a special community of thousands of alumni across the length and breadth of our continent and beyond. And that many of these alumni are involved in diverse fields of human endeavor with an unflinching commitment to create a better society and a better world. Animated by our motto, Vis Virtus Veritas, strength, virtue, and truth, inspired by our slogan, where leaders learn, and guided by our values of integrity, human solidarity, social justice, human dignity, human rights, personal excellence, and rational inquiry, they are determined to bequeath future generations a better society and a better world than the one they inherited from generations before theirs. Brian, you exemplify these enduring values that we hold so dear at Rhodes University. You have dedicated your life to making a positive change in our world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to serve others. More than ever before, our world needs people with your heart, Brian. But thank you for reminding us in a very unique and special way that in the face of extraordinary challenges, there is always much to celebrate in life. And that life itself is worth celebrating. Thank you for flying the flag of our university with great honor and distinction. As your alma mater, we salute you, we honor you, we celebrate you, and we commend you for all that you have done and will continue to do. We are immensely proud of you, and we are deeply honored to count you among our most distinguished alumni. Once more, hearty congratulations, Brian. Thank you.
Brian, I can't help but see the smile on your face behind the scenes, because I can see you behind the scenes. Tell me, how does that feel like?
I think I finally understand what imposter syndrome feels like. But no, it's fantastic. It's such an honor, and yeah, when I hear what I consider to be a fairly humble life described in those terms, it's a bit difficult for me to recognize that life, but it's still a tremendous honor. I mean, it's great. It's nice to be recognized, and if I'm making a difference, then you know that's fantastic. So I'm very pleased.
Well, I'm definitely glad the good VC got to read that out, because as you can tell, everyone, Brian really doesn't like to brag, but you know, the work precedes him and it's bragging on its own accord. But you know, if you're just joining us, thank you so much for everyone for joining in on our leadership conversation. I'm in conversation with Brian and the VC at Rhodes University, talking about disability equality, a human rights issue, the role of universities, government, and society. But before we go on to straight into the conversation, I'd like to break on the side and speak to Dr. Mabizela regarding an alumni of us, Sikim Gabateli, who is a multi-award winning broadcaster. VC, you do have some news for us on that regard.
Thank you very much, Nantobego. As we honor and celebrate the contribution and achievements of one of our own, let us spare a thought for our distinguished alumna and an award-winning financial journalist, Sikim Kabadeli, who had stroke in February this year. Siki has been in and out of hospitals, and over the past few months, things have been quite hard. She is now with her family, where she is undergoing rehabilitation. Siki needs our prayerful support, but equally important, she needs our financial support to meet the financial costs of her significant medical bills. Last Friday, on the 20th of November, was her birthday. And I spoke to her mom to convey our heartfelt congratulations to her on her birthday and to wish her full and speedy recovery. May Siki draw courage and inspiration in your journey, Brian, and be filled with hope and optimism that at this time of great challenge for her, because you are an inspiration. I think you're someone that we can all look up to. So I do invite our alumni, those who can, please extend your hand. Let us stand together with one of our best. Siki is one of our own. I think she needs us not only in terms of prayerful support, but also in financial needs so that she can meet the financial costs of her rehabilitation. Her mom assured me that she's making steady progress, and I'm looking forward to the day when she shall have fully recovered. Thank you very much, Nanto.
Thank you very much, VC. And of course, Siki Ngabadeli is certainly the most amazing award-winning journalist and someone with a broadcast background myself. Siki's arms are definitely have been the greatest one to fall into, especially starting out in the professional space. So we definitely will yield the call, VC. Thank you so much for those who are still with us in conversation. Just to remind you that this series is brought to you by the Rhodes University's Division for Communication and Advancements, fostering a productive lifelong relationship with our alumni. And now we are about to go straight into today's topic of disability equality. And as we rightfully know in South Africa, we really do have progressive legislation when it comes to the rights of persons with disability. But then what happens with the oversight or lack thereof in the workplace, socially, and in terms of the universal designs of buildings, both publicly and privately, not to mention state housing for persons living with disability, and that's just the South African context. What I want to frame our discussion from today is clear instructions from Brian saying that from his side, he would like to frame the discussion from a place where disabled people are not seen as vulnerable people in need of benefication. He believes that given the tools for equality of opportunity and a level playing field, disabled people can be productive members of society with a full contribution to society. So I just want to frame our conversation today before zooming off to when Brian was at Rhodes University back in 1989. I'm ashamed to say that's around about the time I was born, but Ryan, it's all about you. How was Rhodes back then? Oh my gosh, how was your time?
It was a really interesting time, and what I found most interesting was, as Andrew said, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and we had a bit of a jump on you in terms of getting independence and universal suffrage. And so I had 6 years of living in a post-independent Zimbabwe, and coming to Rhodes was really interesting for me to see the situation in South Africa. And it was a real eye-opener for me. I think it was the first step on my journey to understanding equality as a universal issue, and it was a very, very small step because it was I was often thrown off course by the the landlords of the Vic Hotel and the Cathcart Arms Hotel, and their offerings in the bars and places of refuge. But it was really interesting, and it was for me it was I was a very lazy person. I'm still quite a lazy person, which is one of the reasons why having a spinal cord injury was not the worst thing that happened to me in my life, because it means that I sort of get to sit down quite a lot, and that sort of chimes quite nicely with my internal laziness. But I was intellectually lazy before I got to Rhodes, and when I got to Rhodes, I very quickly learned that it was a take no prisoners environment on the intellectual front, and certainly amongst my peers, it was nothing was said that you couldn't say anything that you couldn't back up, and that was a very, very salutary lesson for me to learn, to actually think before I opened my mouth. And I think the other thing that I was in Founders Hall, I was in Buerta, and I think because that was one of the smaller sort of residences, and it was quite well established. One of the things that's always resonated with me was being in an environment with people studying other courses. And although I was doing a business degree, I feel like I came away from Rhodes with a much more universal education, because I was surrounded by people doing law degrees and reading English, and because we were all mixed so closely in that sort of collegiate environment, you didn't just get away with thinking just about your own narrow track of academic achievement. And I think that was probably the single biggest thing that Rhodes gave me.
Brian, that is still the distinctive feature of Rhodes University, that formative education.
Yes.
Which allowed people to pick and choose courses and construct their own curricula. But it was not so much what people learned, more than what they developed, the attitudes, the values, and the competencies. And that is why you find some of our graduates who majored in history and anthropology being in charge of banks. And you say, but you should have done a BCom. No, someone did a BA majoring in history and anthropology. So I must really give a shout out to all the alumni of Rhodes University. This is the best university, and I'm inordinately privileged to be its Vice Chancellor. And you really built and sustained a culture of academic excellence, which is unmatched.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And a very specific example of that for me was in my third year, I was majoring in business administration and accountancy, and I needed a third credit for my final year. But the latitude that I was given, I cast around, thought, I really want to add something different. I want to add something that is going to give me something different. And so I did anthropology, and it was just an absolute revelation to me to be exposed to an academic way of thinking that was just so outside of the narrow grounds of accountancy debits and credits. No disrespect to my accountant colleagues, but it was really interesting. And I think when I left Rhodes and went to Unilever, as Andrew said, I really drew on that experience of thinking about that sort of anthropological approach when I was having to go and work in the different environments of what was then an incredibly diverse and challenging South Africa with people in very, very different circumstances. So yeah, that absolutely resonates with me. Yeah.
So Brian, you at Rhodes, you do your Bachelor's of Commerce, you do your business administration, but 4 years after that, you've worked at Unilever, you've crisscrossed the country, and you get to really understand South Africa a bit more. But your accident that changes the trajectory of your life, it happens in the UK. Tell us about that moment, but about finding the tools to going forward. In your way, had you even known about disability equality? Was it even language at this point in time?
Absolutely not. No, it was so far off my radar. There's a thing, a concept called the disability paradox. And what the disability paradox is that people who look at disabled people from the outside assume that living with a disability is a constant struggle. And I had a really interesting journey. I was actually the third person from my class at school to have a spinal cord injury. And I moved to the UK. I was made redundant from Unilever. I chose a voluntary redundancy because I'd always wanted to travel. And so that was the plan. I was going to go over and travel and see the world. And just before I left, I met one of the other people that from my class at school who had broken their neck. And I was absolutely shocked by them. They were an incomplete injury. So she isn't a wheelchair user, but I was really taken aback. And it never even occurred to me that about 8 weeks later, I was going to be in a very similar situation. So no, I had no concept of disability equality. And I fell very firmly into the people without disability side of the disability paradox. And so it was really interesting. And my first, I'd been in the UK 6 weeks and I had my accident. And my initial reaction, if I'm honest, was to ignore it. I thought, this isn't happening. And the reason that that's possible is because when you have an acquired impairment, like a spinal cord injury, it's literally an overnight experience. You know, one day I was tearing around London, and a 25-year-old going here, there, and everywhere. And the next day I was paralyzed from my shoulders down. But inside my head, I felt like exactly the same person. And I didn't really compute the change in my body with the change in my head. And I think although I'm not a parent, I think it's a bit like having a child. You know, acquiring a disability, it doesn't come with a manual. You don't, when you break your neck, they don't give you a manual which tells you how to be disabled. In the same way that I think when you have a child, you have to fumble your way through for quite a lot of it. And so for me, for many years, for about 3 or 4 years, I just was trying to pretend that it hadn't happened. But that sort of mental approach became more and more difficult to sustain because I kept experiencing things like I went to the cinema to watch film and I wasn't let in, and I was told that I was a fire hazard. And I've never spontaneously combusted in my life, and I don't really have any plans to spontaneously combust in the near future. So I didn't really understand why I was being told that I was a fire hazard. And that was just one example of what I now call micro discriminations. And each one of those is not in and of themselves life-changing, but when they mount up and when they build up, it became more impossible for me to sustain this attitude that, well, nothing's changed. And so I had to start thinking about, okay, well, what is my new situation? The only thing I could fall back on was where I'd come from and what my life experience had been. And my experience had been growing up in Africa, and I mean, albeit a pale, straight male experience of South Africa, or Southern Africa, which I absolutely recognize is not universal. And I realized that sort of meant two things for me. I had an assumption of entitlement. And the second thing that I realized was that I had very much a Southern African attitude of, well, we'll just have to make a plan and just power through. If there's a problem, you just power through and you just get on with it. And so it took me quite a long time to get to terms and with the fact that the two things emerged for me over time. The first was that we are prisoners of our cultural environment that we grow up in. I mean, the Jesuits in the Catholic Church have a fantastic saying, which is, give me the boy until he's 7 years old, and I'll give you the man. And what we learn in those early years is really significant and lasts with us for the rest of our lives. And I'm very conscious of the fact that unpacking what I had experienced and learned in the first 12 years of my life is going to be, it's a lifelong project. You know, it's not something that I think I'll ever tick a box and say, right, I've achieved that. So,
Brian, go ahead. I just want to pick up on the earlier point that you made, Brian, about how the people look at people with disabilities and think that every single day is a day of struggle. Here at Rhodes, every year we have a week of raising awareness about disability. And at one point, we had a speaker who made a point which has really stuck with me, that the biggest barrier that people with disabilities have to contend with is the attitude that people have towards people with disabilities. What's your view?
No, I think
she was just saying that, look, we can deal with the physical challenges and infrastructure, but the issue of the attitude that people have towards people with disabilities.
That's absolutely right. You know, I think that with the right attitude, the physical barriers, the all of those sorts of things can quite easily be overcome. And I think the other thing that's really important to recognize is that it's a source of frustration to me in a way. It works to my advantage, but the international symbol of disability is a wheelchair. And the reality is that less than 10% of disabled people are wheelchair users, and less than 1% of disabled people are full-time wheelchair users. In other words, people who can't mobilize. And so, for example, when I was first injured, I used to get incredibly frustrated when I was booking a flight and booking the assistance that I needed for a flight. I used to get really frustrated when they said, when they'd ask me, well, can you walk from the door of the plane to your seat? And I'd say no. But I've learned over time that that's not an unreasonable question, because the vast majority of disabled people are either not wheelchair users, or if they are wheelchair users, they can mobilize and walk for a short distance. And so by having the wheelchair as the sort of universal symbol of disability, we lock into our brains this idea that it's all about lifts and ramps and it's all about physical access. And we lose sight of the fact that there's a person there and the person wants to be recognized before their wheelchair is recognized, or before whatever it is that they whatever their impairment is or anything else. So yes, it's with the right attitude, you can just overcome pretty much anything.
Yeah. Brian, I see you also say that one of the things that can help is academia can really help to shape how we think about disability, which again goes into the attitude that you speak about right now. And maybe perhaps in answering that question, you can talk about some of the work you've done in shaping the health and social care policies.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, everything starts with an idea, and that's where academia comes in, because academia is all about ideas, and so everything sort of has to start with an idea. And I mean, I don't know how familiar the people that are watching are with the sort of social models of or the social theories of disability, but essentially there's sort of three approaches that are predominant in certainly I think our culture and Western culture, and that's this idea that there's one which places disability within the individual. So you look at me, and my name's Brian OShea, and if I arrive at a building that's got a flight of steps to get into it, there's essentially three ways of approaching it. And the one is, my name's Brian OShea, I've got a spinal cord injury. The reason I can't get into the building is because I've got a spinal cord injury and I can't get up out of my wheelchair and walk up the stairs. The second way of looking at it is, my name's Brian OShea. I happen to be a wheelchair user, and the reason I can't get into that building is because there isn't a lift or ramp access. And then the third way, which is a slightly more complex way, but I think it has relevance. It's my name's Brian OShea, and I happen to be a wheelchair user. And even in the most accessible environment, I'm always going to have what I think the academics call a residual impairment effect. So even if the environment is in the most accessible environment, it's going to take me longer to get out of bed than the average person. It's going to take me longer to get going in the morning than the average person. I'm going to have neuropathic pain issues that not everyone has to deal with. And so those ideas come from academia. And as Andrew said, I was fortunate enough to meet with some of the people that were instrumental in developing the social model of disability and separating it out from the medical model of disability. For people that are involved in disability, Vic Finkelstein and Mike Oliver were probably two big names, and Baroness Jane Campbell was very active at that time as well. And so everything that I do is essentially trying to create a level playing field. Now, my area of speciality is in health and social care funding, and essentially what that means is money for people to access the care and support that they need to live full and fulfilled lives. And this is where I become acutely aware that there is such a big difference between the UK and South Africa. But my role is essentially to develop and work on a particular aspect of NHS policy that provides funding or provision of care and support for people with long-term healthcare needs outside of the hospital setting. So whether that's in a sort of a residential nursing home or in their own home, as most spinal cord injured people would hope and expect to find themselves.
Yeah.
And although my focus is spinal cord injury, because hey, play to your strengths, I recognize that people with spinal cord injuries are a relatively small proportion of people who are accessing that funding. So it's people with strokes, it's people with dementia, it's people, all sorts of people with mental health issues, learning disabilities.
Brian, sorry. I just wanted to bring in the VC a bit. Oh, sorry. Let me let you finish your point. Sorry.
No, so just but I think just before I lose that train of thought about the difference between the UK and South Africa, I think it's what I find really interesting is that although in the UK we have more sort of state-run infrastructures to support disabled people across the range of impairments, what that leads to in many respects is the rest of society just abrogating their responsibility over to the state and not really feeling that they have a role to play in engaging and supporting with disabled people. And just before we came live, Nonthabeka, you made a comment that really resonated me. In a very different context, you said you were raised by the whole township, and I think that's something that the Global South can really teach the North, that concept of society and that concept of being a community and being part of a community, and the community not essentially handing responsibility for care and support of disabled people over to the state. And I guess that was just the point that I wanted to make, that I recognize that I'm in a really fortunate position to be living in the UK and have access to the resources that I do have. But equally, I think that the Global South has a lot to teach us.
Now, the concept of society has to come to you too also, VC. You have a whole student body to deal with in this perspective. How much and how can you stretch these policies to an implementation level back home? I started thinking in terms of the immediate changes. What happens to me academically? What happens to me with my MIP? Should I not be able to continue the year for medical reasons? What is there for me in the immediate? Because a lot of it just talks about, oh, we'll have a program that will help you here and there. But tell me about the immediacy of this concept of society that has to come from within your office.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Nonthabeka. Just before I respond to that, I want to pick up on something that Brian mentioned right at the end, which is very much an integral part of who we are as a people, particularly in South Africa. When we talk about Ubuntu, when you say that you were raised by the township, and that speaks to the interconnectedness of all of us, and that my own humanity can only reach its fullness if I affirm, advance, and defend your humanity. And so that is really something really special. When it comes to institutions of higher learning like Rhodes University, where we really have to deal with issues of disability, and as I indicated, we do have a policy on disability. We do have committees that deal with students and staff who live with disability. And I was just observing that Brian was talking about disabled people. And again, language is very important because in our case, we tend to say people with disability. And the whole idea behind that is that you want to see a person first before the disability, and that the disability is something that is just an additional thing. The humanity of the person is really, really central. So we have these committees that deal with these situations. So if someone presents with a certain set of disabilities from the start, we ask our students to disclose their disabilities so that we can accommodate them. And I think that is very important, that we should do everything possible to accommodate our students who come with disabilities, that they are able to realize their full potential. Even if it comes to exams, we have arrangements for those with disabilities to be afforded more time to write if they need such. But it's something that we are really developing with time. And one thing that I think is great about our Constitution is that it recognizes the rights of all of us, including people with disabilities. So we have made significant progress over the years in ensuring that people with disabilities are afforded a fair and a just opportunity to develop to their full potential. And I'm really proud about that, but there's always something to learn. And I'm really delighted that we are discussing these issues today with Brian.
Brian, I think you'd be the best person to fill us in terms of some of the developments and the best ways to campaign in your particular policy, and also regarding disability equality in general, because you have to tell us that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm messing up your facilitation, but I just wanted to come back to something that the VC said, and I think that one of the things that I learned about in terms of disability as an equality issue is this idea of accumulated advantages and accumulated disadvantages. And the easiest way to describe it is if you start 100 people start a marathon, and after the first kilometer, the first 10 people are allowed to go through, and then the second 10 people are given a 1 kilogram weight to carry, and the third 10 people are given a 2 kilogram weight, and so on and so forth. And then at the second kilometer, everyone stopped again, and the first 10 people can carry on, and the second 10 people are given a kilogram. And you can imagine who's going to win the race. If you were in the first 10 after the first kilometer, then you're going to win the race. And I think that's really where education and giving, I think, weaponizing people's curiosity becomes a really significant part of achieving disability equality, simply by increasing people's accumulated advantage. But yeah, to come to your question, Nantibeka, about the future, really, I mean, I think that's something that I've come to realize in recent times is far too late to the party. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And that's the one thing. And the second thing that I've sort of come across quite recently is, I think I would always have put myself into the category of annoyed activist. I'm not sure that I ever really crossed over into angry, and I never really did militant and chaining myself to railings, but I used to get very, very annoyed, and that translated, and anyone that knows me will testify that I can be quite confrontational when I want to be. And recently I came across an interesting concept that called craftivism. It's a word that I'm still really struggling to pronounce. But the idea behind the craftivist network and the craftivist approach is positive campaigning. It's about, instead of going out and shouting and being quite aggressive and quite quite militant in your campaigning and demanding and demanding this and demanding that, and always focusing on the deficits that you're trying to campaign to overcome. This approach is much more gentle, and it's much more about recognizing what we've achieved so far. And so it's almost like a bit of an iron fist in a velvet glove, in that it recognizes those two things, that equality is difficult for people that aren't that are used to privilege, because they think they're having to give up something, and you have to convince them that equality doesn't involve anyone giving anything up. Equality just involves giving more people access to the same level of things. And so you're not trying to take something away. And I think that for me, it's when people talk about equality and human rights, you'll always hear race, gender, sexual orientation. You'll hear those things mentioned. But how often do you hear disability mentioned? And it's not often that disability is spoken about in the same terms. And I think that we could spend a whole nother hour discussing the reasons for that. But it's really struck me that I suppose to a lesser extent the Me Too movement, but the Black Lives Matter movement that's taken off, I think one of the reasons that it's resonated across the world is that I think it's one of the few occasions where white people have got it. And white people looked at George Floyd and all of the other cases and thought, yeah, I understand. Now I understand what the issues are. And I think that enabled them to come on board in a way that they didn't make them feel threatened. So for me, the future is about trying to be a little less annoying and confrontational, and trying to be a little bit more positive in my messaging, and making the point that I'm not trying to threaten your equality in any way. I'm just trying to work my way up the ladder to get back to your level of equality. I don't know if that makes sense.
Brian, it does. As someone always reminds me, when you light a candle and you allow someone to light their candle in your candle does not diminish in its light. So that's the same thing with human rights. And let me just tell you one of my big bugbears in this country. We have a Ministry of Women, Children, and People with Disability. And it drives me mad because of the underlying message that you can just group all of these things together just like that. But I'm hoping that as time goes on, we will unbundle all of these things and really have proper ministries dealing with each one of these, and not just treat them as the same. Nadia?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, VC, and thank you so much, Brian. I think for me, that was such a beautiful take home. Equality is difficult for people from privilege. I think that makes you see things with much better perspective. To everyone at home, guys, it's exactly 4 o'clock on the dot. It's a different time zone for O'Brien on the other side of the world, but hey, he's still gonna celebrate. Don't count on us counting on him after this. But thank you so much for everyone joining our leadership conversation. It's been such an absolute pleasure to be able to celebrate and honor the works of Brian, not just in his field, in his society, but also in his university. Brian, just reading your story and having a look at your citation conversation. Your work moves me, your passion moves me, and it fuels me to want to carry on doing the things I want to do. And thank you for that. Thank you for that instilling of an attitude, which is just something that we touched on. So I'm just going to allow everyone else to say their thanks and their goodbye so we can let everyone go along their way. Brian, let's start with you. Would you like to say farewell and thank everyone for joining me today?
Yeah, listen, thanks so much. It's, as I say, it's a real honor, and it's a delight. So thank you. Thanks everyone. I've said too much already.
Never. You are the man of the moment. Never, never. I'm giving you permission to brag, Brian. Brag. Brag. You've got all the data. Brag as much as you can. VC, to you, what are your parting words with us?
Look, it is always such a great joy when we reconnect with our alumni more generally, but when we connect with people like Brian, it makes it so special, and it's such a great privilege, and one feels truly privileged to share this common world with people like Brian. Brian, you represent the best and the finest, and we are super proud of you. And to your family, we are very grateful to them for looking after you and for making sure that you continue to make a positive contribution in this world. It is through our individual and collective actions that we can witness the emergence of a better world and a better society, a more just, a more humane, a more caring, a more equitable, a fairer and a more compassionate society and a better world. So thank you so much for allowing us to celebrate you and to give us a reason to celebrate as Rhodes University. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone that has joined us. And of course, on behalf of Brian, thank you so much to Brian's mom for watching, for Andrew and Greg Vermark, Roger Brooks, Professor Surtees, and Jane Campbell. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us and being part of this conversation. We absolutely appreciate it. And guys, when alumni gather, can you see what happens? Can you see what happens when leaders learn indeed? Thank you so much. For those who've missed the conversation, please don't forget that this live will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. That's the Rhodes University's YouTube channel. You can definitely find the conversation. If you want to be a distinguished alumni, listen, there's a whole criteria that you can also certainly find on the website. Thank you so much for everyone joining us. My name is Nondobeko Spisi. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you and goodbye. It's a wrap.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Great. And thank you so much, Brian.
No, thank you.
Oh, of course. How can I not? Thank you so much to the Rhodes University Division for Communication and Advancement, fostering productive and lifelong relationships with the alumni. Thank you so much to the Rhodes team. Thank you so much, guys.
They are the best team.
They made this possible. They made this possible. Thank you so much, guys. Brian, go celebrate, go pop your champagne, do whatever you do to celebrate. Andrew, it's been great. Everyone else,